My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 31 years old, and 6 months ago, my family buried me while I was still alive. Not metaphorically. Not emotionally.
Legally,
Socially.
financially,
They erased me from existence while my heart was still beating inside a hospital room 200 miles away.
and the worst part?
The people who did it weren't strangers. They were my own brother and sister. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night with the smell of antiseptic in my lungs and the phantom echo of machines beeping beside my bed. Sometimes I still wonder if I actually died back then, and this life afterward is just some strange punishment disguised as survival. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the coma. Before the funeral. Before I watched my own siblings cry fake tears over an empty casket. Back then, my life was simple. Busy, but stable. I owned a software consulting business that I had spent nearly a decade building from scratch. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough that I could live comfortably. I owned my home outright, had solid investments, and thanks to a small inheritance from my grandmother years earlier, I'd managed to build savings that most people my age didn't have. Around $300,000 spread across different accounts. Not billionaire money. Just security. The kind of security that made other people resent you when they didn't have it themselves. Especially family. My older sister Rebecca had always carried this quiet bitterness around me. Ever since we were kids, she acted like life had cheated her specifically while somehow rewarding me unfairly. After our parents died, that bitterness got worse. Rebecca was 33, restless, impulsive, always chasing some new version of herself that never lasted more than a few months. One year it was real estate, the next it was photography, then online coaching, then cosmetics, then financial influencing, despite being buried in debt. Nothing stuck. And whenever things collapsed, she came to me. My younger brother Ethan was different. Colder. More controlled. He owned a struggling construction company and hid his panic beneath forced confidence and passive-aggressive jokes. His wife Vanessa smiled too much whenever money was mentioned. That should have scared me more than it did. The tension inside the family worsened after Rebecca's boyfriend left her. She moved into Ethan and Vanessa's house, temporarily, though everyone knew temporary meant permanent. Soon, the three of them became this strange little unit fueled by mutual resentment, and I became the target. "You know what your problem is?" Rebecca asked me one Thanksgiving while pouring herself another glass of wine. "You've never struggled enough to understand normal people." I laughed awkwardly, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. "You think because you work on a laptop all day, you earned everything," she continued. "Some of us actually have responsibilities." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Must be nice having savings while the rest of us are drowning." I remember staring at them across the dinner table, trying to understand how the conversation had shifted so quickly, from mashed potatoes to hostility. "I've helped both of you," I said carefully. And I had. I'd paid Rebecca's rent, twice. Covered Ethan's payroll once when his business nearly collapsed. Loaned money I never saw again. But generosity doesn't cure entitlement. It feeds it. Rebecca slammed her fork down. "You help us just enough to feel superior." Vanessa quietly placed a hand on Ethan's arm, like she was calming him down, but I noticed the look she gave me.
Calculating.
Like she was measuring something invisible. That night should have been the moment I understood they didn't love me anymore. Maybe they never had. But denial is easier than grief. The breaking point came during Christmas dinner. Rebecca announced she wanted $50,000 to launch an online fashion business. Not a loan. An investment. "What exactly is the business plan?" I asked carefully. Her expression changed instantly. "There it is," she snapped. "The interrogation." "I'm not interrogating you. $50,000 is a huge amount of money. You have it. That doesn't mean I can hand it out blindly." Ethan sighed dramatically. "You always act like we're trying to rob you." The irony of that sentence still makes me sick. Rebecca's voice rose louder. "You're selfish, Danielle. Completely selfish. Mom and Dad would be ashamed of how greedy you've become." That hurt. Not because it was true. Because she knew exactly where to stab. I stood up from the table, trying to keep my composure. "I'm done having this conversation." That's when Vanessa spoke softly from across the room. "Well," she said with a strange smile, "I guess we all get our share eventually." The room went quiet for half a second. I remember looking at her, confused. Ethan chuckled awkwardly, like she'd made a harmless joke. Rebecca smirked into her wine glass, and I ignored the cold feeling crawling up my spine. I wish I hadn't. 3 months later, I was driving to Portland for a client meeting during a rainstorm that felt biblical. The roads were slick. Visibility was terrible. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter as headlights blurred through sheets of rain. Then, hydroplaning.
A violent spin.
Metal screaming. Glass exploding. And darkness. According to the medical records I later read, my car flipped twice before crashing into a tree. A truck driver found me unconscious and called emergency services. I was airlifted to the hospital with severe brain trauma and internal bleeding. The doctors weren't sure I would survive the night. For the first month, I existed in fragments. Machines breathing beside me. Voices underwater. Pain without shape. I drifted in and out of unconsciousness while surgeons fought to reduce swelling in my brain. And while I was fighting to survive, my family was already discussing what to do with my money. Because Ethan was listed as my emergency contact, the hospital informed him immediately after surgery. The doctors explained everything carefully.
Critical condition.
Possible recovery. Long rehabilitation ahead. But hopeful signs. Hope. That word should have mattered. Instead, Ethan saw opportunity. At first, he pretended to be the devastated brother. He called relatives. Posted emotional updates online. Accepted sympathy. But privately, something else was happening. Something darker. Within 2 weeks of my coma, Ethan contacted a lawyer about gaining power of attorney over my finances due to my incapacitation. On paper, it sounded responsible.
Necessary.
But Ethan never intended to protect me. He intended to erase me. The truly horrifying part is how methodical they became. Rebecca helped organize everything. Vanessa handled details quietly in the background. The three of them transformed my near-death experience into a business plan. Later, investigators would discover text messages between them discussing timelines, inheritance laws, and how quickly assets could be transferred after a death certificate was filed. Not if Danielle dies. When? As though my death was already decided. About a month into my coma, the doctors began seeing improvement in my condition. Brain swelling decreased, reflexes improved. There was cautious optimism. The hospital staff told Ethan I had a real chance at recovery. That should have ended everything. Instead, it accelerated the plan. Ethan suddenly claimed our family had decided I wouldn't want to remain on life support. A lie. A complete lie. I had never discussed anything like that with him. Ever. The doctors resisted immediately because I wasn't deteriorating anymore. I was stabilizing. One physician even noted in the records that Ethan seemed unusually impatient whenever recovery timelines were discussed.
Impatient.
As if every additional day I stayed alive complicated something for him. When the hospital refused to withdraw support without proper legal authority, Ethan pivoted to something even more dangerous. If he couldn't legally kill me, he would legally declare me dead anyway. And somehow, unbelievably, it worked. A corrupt county clerk accepted forged paperwork and processed a fake death certificate claiming I had died from complications after surgery. Meanwhile, I was still lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Still breathing. Still alive. But legally dead. The moment that certificate existed, everything changed. Ethan arranged for me to be transferred to a long-term rehabilitation facility under a false identity. He told them I was an unidentified patient without surviving relatives.
A charity case.
A woman nobody was looking for. Then he started emptying my life piece by piece. My accounts, my house, my belongings, my existence. But first, they needed a funeral. And according to everyone who attended it, my siblings performed beautifully. People always imagine funerals as sacred, quiet, heavy,
respectful.
Mine was apparently a performance. I didn't attend it physically, of course. At the time, I was still unconscious in a rehabilitation facility outside Portland, under the name Jane Doe 47. But later, after the investigation began, people told me everything. Every detail. Every lie. And somehow, hearing about it afterward hurt more than if I'd witnessed it myself. Because imagination fills in the cracks more cruelly than reality ever could. The funeral was held 6 weeks after my fake death certificate was filed. Long enough for sympathy to build. Long enough for Ethan and Rebecca to prepare their act. They rented a funeral home with dark mahogany walls and soft gold lighting. They ordered flower arrangements expensive enough to look loving, but not extravagant enough to raise suspicion. Vanessa coordinated everything. Of course she did. She always loved appearances. My cousin later told me the first strange thing was how excited Rebecca seemed while setting up photographs near the entrance. She kept rearranging them like she was decorating for a wedding, he said quietly, months later. At the time, I thought maybe grief affects people differently. Greed does. They displayed framed pictures of me smiling at birthdays, company events, vacations, ordinary moments stolen from my real life and transformed into funeral decorations. There was a memory table,
Candles.
a slideshow, music, an empty casket. That part still chills me. An empty casket standing in the middle of the room while I was alive somewhere else, struggling to wake up. Ethan gave the eulogy. Several people later admitted it was convincing enough to make them cry. He stood at the podium in a black suit, voice trembling at exactly the right moments. Danielle was the heart of our family, he said. The heart of the family. The same sister he was actively stealing from while she lay unconscious. He talked about my generosity, about my beautiful spirit, about how sudden tragedy reminds us to appreciate the people we love before it's too late. I read the printed speech later during the trial. Every sentence felt like acid poured directly into my chest. Rebecca apparently cried harder than anyone. Big, dramatic sobs. Vanessa wrapped her arms around her while comforting guests like a grieving saint. People brought casseroles,
Flowers.
cards, money. One of my former clients even offered to help Ethan financially because he shouldn't have to carry this burden alone. The burden. God. Meanwhile, Ethan had already begun draining my bank accounts. Within days of the funeral, nearly $300,000 vanished from my savings, investment portfolios, and business accounts.
Transferred. Liquidated. Spent.
Investigators later reconstructed the timeline. It read like a shopping spree fueled by human evil. Ethan paid off massive business debts. Bought a brand new truck. Rebecca placed a down payment on a luxury condo she could never have afforded otherwise. Designer handbags.
Jewelry. Vacations.
Vanessa quit her job entirely and started planning an expensive kitchen renovation. They spent my money with astonishing speed, as though they feared I might somehow come back. Maybe part of them knew. Maybe guilt whispers even when people pretend not to hear it. While they were celebrating their sudden financial freedom, I was trapped inside a body that barely worked. Recovery from severe brain trauma isn't cinematic. There's no dramatic moment where someone opens their eyes and instantly remembers everything. It's confusion. Fragments. Fear. At first, I couldn't even understand where I was. The rehabilitation facility smelled permanently of bleach and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed constantly overhead, making nights and days blend together into one endless blur. Sometimes I heard nurses speaking softly outside my room. Sometimes I woke up screaming because I thought I was still trapped inside the crashing car. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the absence. No visitors. No family. No one calling my name. At first, the staff assumed I had memory loss, because according to Ethan's paperwork, I was unidentified. No relatives. No emergency contacts. No history. No life. Just another broken patient abandoned by the world. The staff were kind, thankfully. Especially an older nurse named Linda, who braided my hair when my hands trembled too badly to do it myself. "You're safe here, sweetheart," she would whisper whenever panic attacks hit. Safe. Ironic word, because the truth was, I had never been in more danger. Weeks passed in disconnected flashes. I slowly relearned things. My birthday. My address. My name. Danielle Carter. Every time I said it, the staff looked confused because it didn't match their records. "You might be mixing memories together," one doctor told me gently. Brain injury patients often struggle with identity confusion.
Identity confusion.
I almost laugh now thinking about it. The problem wasn't my brain. The problem was that someone had stolen my identity completely. I kept asking for my phone, my family, anyone. But there was always some explanation for why nobody had come. Sometimes these cases take time. Maybe your records haven't updated yet. We're trying to help. I could tell some of them pitied me. They thought I was abandoned. And technically, I was. Around the 5th month, my memories became sharper. Not fully stable, but clearer. I remembered Ethan standing beside my hospital bed after the accident. I remembered Rebecca's voice somewhere nearby. And weirdly, I remembered fear. Not from the accident. From them. At the time, I couldn't explain why. But my body remembered before my mind did. Trauma does that sometimes. One afternoon, I became so frustrated after another failed attempt to contact my family that I broke down crying in the hallway outside physical therapy. That's when I met Patricia. She was a social worker in her early 50s with tired eyes and the kind of calm voice people instinctively trust. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Danielle Carter." Not Jane Doe. Not unidentified female. Danielle Carter. She studied me carefully. "And you're certain?" "Yes." I remember how defensive I sounded. Because after months of people subtly questioning my memory, I was terrified nobody would believe me anymore. Patricia nodded slowly. "Okay, let's figure this out together." Nobody realizes how terrifying it is to need another person to confirm you exist. Patricia started making calls. Checking databases. Hospital records. State identification systems. At first, nothing made sense. Then suddenly, everything did. I'll never forget the exact expression on her face when she walked back into my room the next morning, holding a folder against her chest. She looked pale. Disturbed. Almost frightened. "Danielle," she said carefully, "I need you to stay calm." Those words never lead anywhere good. "What's wrong?" She sat down slowly across from me. "When I searched your records," she hesitated, "you were listed as deceased." The room went silent. Not metaphorically silent. Truly silent. Even the hallway noise seemed to disappear. I stared at her blankly. "What?" "There's a death certificate under your name." I actually laughed at first. A small, confused laugh. Because the sentence sounded impossible. "That's ridiculous. I'm sitting right here." "I know." Patricia's voice became softer. "That's why I contacted the hospital immediately." My stomach started turning violently. Cold panic spread through me so fast I thought I might pass out. "No," I whispered. "There has to be some mistake." But deep down, something terrible had already started clicking into place. The missing visitors. The confusion. The fake identity. The silence from my family. Patricia opened the folder slowly. "According to county records," she said carefully, "you died nearly 6 months ago from complications after your accident." My hands began shaking uncontrollably. "No." There was also a funeral. The word hit me harder than the accident itself.
Funeral.
My brother. My sister. Suddenly, Vanessa's smile at Christmas flashed through my mind. We all get our share eventually. I felt physically sick. Patricia leaned forward carefully. "Danielle, do you think someone may have done this intentionally? And for the first time since waking up, I realized my family never thought I was coming back." The police arrived at the rehabilitation facility that same afternoon. 2 detectives, 1 county investigator, and a silence so heavy it felt hard to breathe. Patricia stayed beside me while they asked questions. Did I remember signing any legal paperwork before the accident? No. Did I ever discuss end-of-life wishes with my brother? No. Did I authorize anyone to control my finances? Absolutely not. Every answer seemed to make the detectives more disturbed. One of them, Detective Lawson, finally closed his notebook and exhaled slowly. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "I need to be honest. What happened here looks intentional."
Intentional.
Such a small word for something so monstrous. I sat frozen in the wheelchair beside the window while rain tapped softly against the glass. Outside, people moved through ordinary life, completely unaware that somewhere inside that building sat a woman who had legally died 6 months earlier. "You're saying my family knew?" Lawson exchanged a look with the other detective. "We don't know everything yet, but they did know." I could see it already. That night, I barely slept. Every memory from the past 2 years replayed differently now. Rebecca's resentment, Ethan's bitterness, Vanessa's strange smile during Christmas dinner. All those moments I dismissed suddenly looked like warning signs painted in blood-red letters. The next morning, the investigation exploded. The hospital where I'd originally been treated confirmed they had never officially declared me dead. The signatures authorizing end-of-life decisions were fake. The medical power of attorney paperwork had inconsistencies everywhere. And the death certificate itself?
Fraudulent. Completely fraudulent.
By noon, police were on their way to Ethan's house. I later watched the body cam footage during court proceedings. I wish I hadn't. The officer knocked calmly. Vanessa answered first. The moment she saw police officers standing there, her entire face changed. Not grief. Not concern. Fear. Pure fear. "Is Ethan home?" the officer asked. Within seconds, Ethan appeared behind her. Relaxed at first. Then the detective spoke. "Mr. Carter, we need to discuss your sister Danielle. And I swear to God, I have never seen a human being lose color so quickly." Even through grainy body cam footage, you could see the blood drain from his face instantly. He actually staggered backward. "What about her?" he asked. The detective studied him carefully. "She's alive." 3 seconds. That's how long silence lasted before Ethan spoke again. Not, "Thank God." Not, "Can I see her?" Not, "Is she okay?" Instead, his first words were, "Do I need a lawyer?" Even the detectives looked stunned. Because innocent people don't react that way to miracles. Meanwhile, Rebecca reacted even worse. Police found her at her condo, the condo partially purchased using my stolen money. At first she insisted there had to be some mistake. "That's impossible," she kept repeating. "Danielle died." When detectives informed her they had physically spoken to me that morning, Rebecca became hysterical. "No," she snapped. "We buried her." "We buried her." Not, "I thought she died." Not confusion. Certainty. That sentence became one of the prosecution's strongest pieces of evidence later. Because Rebecca accidentally admitted something crucial. They knew from the beginning I hadn't actually died naturally. The investigation spread fast after that.
Bank records.
Forgery analysis. Hospital logs. Property sales. Every layer revealed something uglier underneath. And the deeper investigators dug, the more horrifying the truth became. The forged death certificate traced back to a corrupt county clerk who accepted a $5,000 bribe from Ethan. The forged signatures on financial documents were laughably bad under forensic examination. But the worst evidence came from their phones. Text messages. Hundreds of them. Cold.
Calculated. Cruel.
I wasn't prepared for how much those messages would hurt. One exchange happened only 3 days after my accident. "Rebecca, how long before we can access the accounts?" Ethan, "Soon. Doctors think she's brain dead anyway." Another message weeks later. "Rebecca, what if she wakes up?" Ethan, "She won't. And even if she does, nobody will trust someone with brain damage." I stopped reading after that the first time. I physically couldn't continue. Patricia found me vomiting in the hospital bathroom afterward. There's something uniquely devastating about realizing your own sibling discussed your possible survival like an inconvenience. But there was one message that destroyed me completely. A week after my funeral, Rebecca texted Vanessa. "I can't believe how easy this was. Danielle was always such a control freak about money. Now we never have to deal with her again." Vanessa replied with laughing emojis. Laughing emojis. While I was still unconscious. Fighting to survive. I think that was the moment something inside me permanently broke. Not dramatically. Not loudly.
Quietly.
Like glass cracking beneath pressure. A week later, doctors finally cleared me to leave the rehabilitation facility temporarily while legal proceedings continued. Returning home after being declared dead is a surreal experience I can barely describe. The world feels wrong.
Tilted.
Like reality itself has become unstable. The first thing I saw driving into town was a faded memorial ribbon tied around a street lamp with my name written on it. In loving memory of Danielle Carter. I stared at it through the car window, while my chest tightened so painfully I thought I might stop breathing again. People had mourned me. Real people. Friends. Clients. Neighbors. People who genuinely cared. While my own family celebrated. My house had already been sold by then. Legally sold. The new owners looked horrified when police explained the situation. I almost felt bad for them. Imagine buying your dream home, only to discover the previous owner wasn't dead after all. Fortunately, they cooperated fully once the fraud investigation became public. But stepping back inside my house weeks later nearly shattered me. Everything felt violated. Drawers opened. Closets emptied. Boxes gone. Rebecca and Ethan had picked through my belongings like vultures stripping a corpse. They sold my furniture. My car. My electronics. Even my clothes. And the things they couldn't profit from? They threw away. Family photographs. Birthday cards from my parents. Old journals. Sentimental keepsakes. Pieces of my life discarded like trash because they had no resale value. I found one broken picture frame in the garage, buried beneath garbage bags. A photo of me and our mother. The glass was shattered across her face. I sat on the garage floor holding it for almost an hour while sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe properly. Not because of the money. Not even because of the fraud. Because they had erased me emotionally long before they erased me legally. Therapy started shortly afterward. Dr. Elena Martinez specialized in trauma recovery, though even she admitted my case was unlike anything she'd ever seen. During one session, I asked the question that haunted me constantly. How do people do something like this to family? Dr. Martinez stayed quiet a moment before answering carefully. Some people stop seeing family as human once money becomes involved. I looked down at my shaking hands. They held my funeral. I know. They cried over an empty coffin while I was still alive. Her expression softened painfully. What they did wasn't just fraud, Danielle. They attempted to erase your identity, your relationships, your existence. That creates a very specific kind of trauma. Psychological murder. That's what she eventually called it. And honestly, that description fit perfectly. Because they didn't just steal my money. They stole my death. My grief. My identity. My place in the world. And somehow, the trial hadn't even started yet. By the time the criminal trial began, the entire town already knew my story. You couldn't walk into a grocery store without hearing whispers. People stared at me constantly. Some looked horrified. Some curious. Some almost afraid. I understood why. Most people don't know how to react when they meet someone who technically attended her own funeral. Local news stations camped outside the courthouse every morning. Reporters treated the case like something out of a crime documentary. One newspaper headline read, "Woman declared dead returns to testify against her own family." Another called it, "The real-life Gone Girl case." I hated that one. Because I hadn't disappeared. I'd been discarded. There's a difference. The courthouse itself felt suffocating the first day of trial. Old wooden benches, fluorescent lights, the smell of coffee and paper and nervous sweat lingering in the air. And sitting across the room from me were Ethan and Rebecca. The first time I saw them in person after everything, I expected rage. Instead, I felt grief. Real grief. Because the people sitting there didn't feel like siblings anymore. They felt like strangers wearing familiar faces. Rebecca looked thinner than I remembered. Pale, exhausted. Her expensive clothes and salon-perfect appearance had vanished now that the stolen money was gone. Ethan looked older by 10 years. But neither of them looked sorry. Terrified, yes. Ashamed publicly, maybe. But sorry? No. Not truly. Their lawyers had separated their defenses immediately, which meant they spent the entire trial trying to destroy each other to save themselves. Ethan's attorney argued that he had been emotionally overwhelmed and made terrible decisions while believing I would never recover, as though grief explained forged documents, bribery, fraud, and theft. Rebecca's lawyer tried a different strategy. She painted Rebecca as manipulated, a vulnerable younger sister pressured into following Ethan's lead. But the prosecution destroyed both arguments within days. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forgery reports, hospital testimony, the fake death certificate, text messages,
Financial transfers.
one after another. Witnesses describe how deliberate everything had been. The hospital staff testimony was especially brutal. One doctor explained how Ethan repeatedly pressured them to discuss end-of-life options, despite signs of my improvement. Another testified that Ethan seemed frustrated whenever positive recovery updates were given.
Frustrated.
Not relieved. The courtroom became completely silent during Patricia's testimony. She walked calmly to the witness stand and described meeting me inside the rehabilitation facility. She was confused, frightened, and desperate to understand why nobody had come for her, Patricia said softly. I couldn't look up while she spoke. I just stared at my hands. She wasn't only recovering from a catastrophic brain injury, Patricia continued. She was simultaneously discovering that her family had erased her identity and declared her dead while she was still alive. The prosecutor asked carefully, "And how did that realization affect Ms. Carter emotionally?" Patricia paused. It devastated her. Simple words, but they hit harder than anything else. Because that was the truth underneath all the headlines and legal language. I was devastated. Not dramatic. Not vengeful. Not obsessed with revenge. Just devastated. Then came the text messages. The prosecution displayed them on giant screens inside the courtroom. Every cruel joke. Every greedy conversation. Every calculation about my money. I watched jurors physically recoil reading Rebecca's message. It's like Christmas and our birthday combined. One woman on the jury actually wiped tears from her eyes during that part. Ethan refused to look at me most of the trial. Rebecca looked at me constantly. Not lovingly. Not regretfully.
Desperately.
Like she still believed somehow I could save her from consequences. The hardest moment came when I testified. Walking to the witness stand felt harder than surviving the accident, because now I had to describe something almost impossible to explain. How did you feel when you learned your family held your funeral while you were alive? The prosecutor asked gently. I remember staring at the microphone for several seconds before answering. Small, I whispered. The courtroom stayed completely silent. They made me feel like my life only mattered financially. I swallowed hard. And the worst part is, they smiled while doing it. Rebecca started crying immediately. Real tears this time. But by then, they meant nothing to me. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. 4 hours to decide the fate of people who spent months destroying mine. Guilty on all major charges.
Fraud.
Forgery.
Identity theft. Financial exploitation. Conspiracy.
The judge described the crime as one of the most disturbing abuses of familial trust he had ever seen. Ethan received 8 years in prison. Rebecca received 5. Vanessa avoided prison, but received probation and financial penalties for knowingly spending stolen money. When sentencing ended, Rebecca turned toward me, sobbing. Danielle, please. I walked away before she could finish. Because there are apologies too late to matter. The money recovery process dragged on for months afterward. I eventually recovered about half of what they stole. The rest was gone forever.
Spent.
Destroyed. Wasted. But strangely, over time, the money stopped feeling important. The emotional aftermath was worse. Far worse. Some nights I couldn't sleep because I kept imagining my funeral. The speeches. The fake crying. People hugging my siblings while they secretly celebrated. I developed panic attacks whenever people said things like, "Family comes first." Therapy helped slowly. Very slowly. Dr. Martinez once told me something I wrote down immediately afterward. Survival isn't the same thing as healing. At first, I didn't understand that. I do now. Because surviving the accident was physical. Healing from betrayal was something entirely different. The town's reaction became complicated too. Most people supported me, But some believed I should forgive Ethan and Rebecca eventually because blood is blood. I learned quickly how uncomfortable people become around unforgivable things. Forgiveness makes observers feel safer. Refusing forgiveness reminds them evil can come from ordinary people, even relatives. Especially relatives. Ethan started sending letters from prison after a few months. Every letter followed the same pattern. Excuses disguised as apologies.
Stress. Financial pressure.
Fear.
Regret.
Never true accountability. One line still haunts me. I never thought you'd actually wake up. As though that somehow made everything better. Rebecca's letters were different. More emotional. More manipulative. She wrote about rebuilding our relationship. Healing together. Becoming closer through trauma. The audacity still shocks me. She genuinely seemed unable to grasp that some betrayals permanently destroy relationships. You cannot hold your sister's funeral for profit and then expect Christmas dinners afterward. Life doesn't work that way. Eventually, though, something unexpected happened. I met someone. His name was Michael. We met through a rehabilitation support program connected to the hospital. He worked as a trauma nurse and already knew pieces of my story before we spoke. At first, I kept waiting for him to look at me with pity. But he never did. He listened. Patiently.
Quietly.
Without trying to fix me. The first time I told him I struggled trusting people now, he nodded gently and said, "That sounds completely reasonable after what happened." No judgment. No pressure. Just understanding. I think that was the moment I realized healing might actually be possible. Not complete healing. I don't think some wounds ever disappear fully. But enough. Enough to breathe again. Enough to laugh sometimes without guilt. Enough to build a future instead of only surviving the past. It's been almost a year now since I came back from the dead. My business is slowly recovering. Some clients returned after learning the truth. Others didn't. And honestly, I understand why. My life sounds unbelievable even to me sometimes. But I'm learning something important through all of this. Family isn't blood. It isn't shared DNA. It's the people who protect your existence instead of profiting from your disappearance. Ethan and Rebecca thought they won. For a few months, maybe they believed they had. They spent my money, lived in my house, cried fake tears over my coffin. But in the end, they lost everything that actually mattered. Their freedom, their reputations, any chance at real love or trust ever again. Meanwhile, somehow, I survived. Not gracefully, not perfectly, but genuinely. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. The people who tried hardest to erase me ended up forcing me to rebuild myself into someone stronger than the woman they buried.